Very glad that you're all here for my thesis defense. Today I'm going to present what I've been working on over the last years on safe and scalable planning under uncertainty for autonomous driving. First of all, you have to know that road fatalities represent about 1.35 million of deaths each year worldwide. And we know that most of those crashes are actually caused by human error. So the promises of autonomous driving is that if we can help humans achieving some of the maneuvers on the road or replace them for some other maneuver, then we could potentially avoid most of those crashes and save many lives. Of course, autonomous driving is a very complex problem. It's often divided into subcomponents. You have perception, feedback control, motion planning, decision making, and route planning. And today we're going to focus on decision making. Decision making is one of the most important parts of this whole autonomy stack because it takes information and turns it into action. And it has to do so in a time span of about 0.1 to 1 second. So today I'm going to show you how we can take decisions autonomously to solve some complex driving scenarios. So what we'd like to do is design some algorithms to take decisions autonomously. And we want the decision to be safe, robust to sensor limitation, and scalable. So it means to handle complex environments with many pedestrians and many cars. Here I identified several challenges that make some common driving situations still very challenging for autonomous driving today, for autonomous vehicles. So first you have diverse traffic, so mostly in urban areas you have both cars, pedestrians, bicycle, buses. It can be crowded. You need to consider multiple traffic participants in a restricted area. You might have occlusions. If you look at this crosswalk scenario, the autonomous vehicle in blue must anticipate a risk that it cannot detect. And you also have unexpected behavior. So if we would try to do a left turn on this road, then the success of the maneuver often relies on our ability to anticipate how the other driver is going to react. So to account for all of those challenges, we need to design very smart decision-making algorithms. And previous work have been trying to address the problem using rule-based methods or finite state machine. The challenge here is that we cannot account for everything that might happen with rules. To give you an idea of what a rule-based system might be, we could say, so if there is a pedestrian, I must stop, but only if it's crossing and only if it's on my lane. So we would have to add as many rules to handle everything that could potentially happen. And it makes the system very difficult to scale to complex scenarios. And moreover, it's very hard to take into account things like sensor uncertainty within those rule-based methods. Instead, one can rely on planning and optimization. So in planning and optimization, we'll propose a mathematical model of the environment. And using that mathematical model, as well as a planning algorithm like tree search or dynamic programming, we're going to find a decision strategy that maximizes or minimizes the cost function. And the claim here is that if we could find a model that can capture all of the things, sensor uncertainty, stochastic behavior, and driver's intention, then we could find very good decision strategies. Unfortunately, there exists such model. It's called a partially observable Markov decision process, or POMDP, but it comes with a lot of computational challenges associated with it. And today I'm going to try to show you how we can overcome some of them, especially in terms of scalability and safety. So first, I'll show you the mathematical formulation of the problem, and then I'll go through my main contributions. First, show you how to scale POMDP algorithms to complex driving scenarios, and then how to improve safety of these algorithms using model checking and formal methods. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is to define the whole autonomous driving problem into a mathematical framework. So here we choose this framework of the partially observable Markov decision process. The motivation is that it can take into account stochastic evolution and also things like sensor noise and perception limitation. So formally, a POMDP is defined by a set of different components. I'm going to go through all of them and use this running example of a car trying to make a left turn at an intersection that's potentially occluded. So first of all, we have states. The states describe every possible position and velocities of the ego vehicle. So ego vehicle is the one being controlled, and of the other car. In addition, in the state we'll also add intention of the other drivers, like turn right, turn left, if they are going to take way, give way, and so on. Then come action. So here we're talking about decision making, and we'll assume that some lower level mechanism will give us this path. We know that we want to do a left turn, and we're only going to control the acceleration of the car along this path. So the analogy here is that it moves kind of like a bead on a wire. Then the transition model. The transition model represents how things move over time. And in this case, it takes into account stochastic motion. So for example, we can model the behavior of the red car using a constant velocity with noise model. And in addition, we'll have a probability of appearance. So at each time step, there is a probability that a car appears at the beginning of the road. Observations. So the autonomous vehicle is equipped with some sensors that have some limitations, so we cannot measure everything about the environment. Here we'll assume that we can measure position and velocity of other vehicles. We'll have some noisy measurements. And in some cases, for example, if there are buildings on the side of the road, then there might be occluded area. In those cases, we cannot observe anything. So to cope with this limitation, the agent, the blue vehicle, is going to maintain a belief, which is its internal knowledge about the environment. So essentially, the belief is where the agent thinks things are in the environment. So more formally, we can say a belief is a distribution over states. The right way to think about it in this picture is that the blue car will think that there's a probability that other cars are in this occluded location. And we can also have a belief over intention. So we can have a belief on whether this car is going to wait or go further. Given this representation of the environment, we need to take an action. So my goal today is to find those objects, policies, that are mapping belief to action. And we want policies that maximize the expected accumulated reward. So this reward function here describes the objective that we want to satisfy. So commonly in autonomous driving, there are different objectives that we would like to optimize for, like safety, efficiency, and comfort. Today we're only going to talk about safety and efficiency, and we will arbitrarily reward the agent with +1 when it reaches the goal. And it will have a penalty of lambda if it's in a collision with another vehicle. The intuition behind this structure is that for very high lambda, we'll have a high penalty for collision and a very risk-averse behavior, but for low lambda, we'll have a more aggressive behavior. So far, I've defined all of the components in the POMDP object up there. And the nice thing with this model is that it can be directly applied to a variety of scenarios. So for example, I described the example of an intersection. We could apply the exact same model to this crosswalk example, for instance. So to summarize the overall approach, we'll have a simulator that contains the states. It's the ground truth about the environment, position, velocities, and intention of other agents. From that state, our agent, the blue vehicle, will get some noisy measurement that's sensitive to occlusion. And it will use that observation to update its belief about the environment. And the focus for today is on this belief state planning box, which performs a mapping from belief to action. So we'll see how we can actually compute this mapping efficiently in complex scenarios. So to find policy, we use the concept of value function. The value function represents the best accumulated reward that the agent can get if it's at the belief point B and take action A. And we know it Q of B and A. The nice thing with that object is that once we have computed this value function, it's very easy to extract a policy with taking the argmax over action. For PanDPs, to compute that value function, we could use the Bellman equation. It's a very nice equation that models a trade-off between the immediate reward that you can get now versus the reward that you can get in the future. However, in practice, using this equation is highly intractable. The main reason is that we want to compute this value function at every possible belief point, and the space of all the possible beliefs is infinite. It is very hard to explore this space. Fortunately, there exists some algorithm to approximate this value function, but they both have limitations. Usually there is a trade-off between how close they can estimate this value function and how scalable they are. So let's see, if we look at the example that I showed earlier, if we could apply this algorithm. So if we consider the problem with only our ego vehicle and another traffic participant, we have a 4-dimensional grid. We have a reasonable number of states we could directly apply those two algorithms. But if we add another traffic participant, our grid grows and the number of states grows exponentially with the number of traffic participants that we add in the representation. And we couldn't use neither QMDP or SourceUp to solve this problem. So now I'm going to show you how we can decompose the problem to get the decision-making algorithm to scale to scenes with multiple traffic participants. We're going to use a concept called utility fusion. It consists in decomposing the large problem into a combination of subproblems. And we can compute the value function of the subproblem in a very tractable manner. We'll compute Q1 to Qn. And then we'll try to combine those individual value functions to approximate the value function of the global problem. So here are two examples that one could use to approximate this value function. We could take the average of them, which is essentially considering that every subproblem is equally important, and we try to maximize the overall utility. Or we could take the minimum, so this would be, for example, a worst case approach, where we only consider the subproblem that has the worst value. It's like doing the less possible harm kind of approach. Right, so how to apply this to our autonomous driving problem? We can do an entity-based decomposition. So let's say we're facing 3 pedestrians. We can split the problem into 3 instances of a problem with only 1 pedestrian to avoid. So we can solve this problem using QMDP or SourceUp, for example. We would get a value function out of it. We can evaluate that value function with respect to the 3 different situations, and then fuse the information using the minimum here to identify which of these sub-scenario is sort of the worst case scenario. So here we can see that this pedestrian is the most critical, and the value function associated to this pedestrian says that we should brake. Here is a demonstration of the algorithm. So in blue is the vehicle that we control. Those like transparent circle is the belief where we think pedestrians might be. The pink circles correspond to ground truth pedestrian position. Yeah. So we can see that the algorithm is able to handle multiple pedestrians at the same time. And you will see a very interesting behavior. When there are no pedestrians, the car slows down, but it doesn't come to a full stop. It's able to adapt its speed. And even when a pedestrian kind of goes out at the last minute, it's able to brake. So similarly, we could apply the same algorithm to an intersection scenario. So here again, the blue transparent cars represent the belief. So we have this belief that there might be cars in this part of the intersection. So what we can see is that we have this nudging behavior that emerged from the algorithm. So here the car is first going pretty slowly, and then once it has visibility, it takes more assertive action. Here are the quantitative results. So as I showed earlier, in the reward function, we have this cost for collision. So we can tune this cost to generate different policies. So each of those points is a different policy that's computed either using the QMDP algorithm or SARSOP. And we compare the two ways of using the utilities by either taking the sum or the minimum. So what we can see here is that there is a clear trade-off between safety and efficiency. So the y-axis is the number of collisions that we saw in simulation, and the x-axis is the average time to cross. So ideally, we want policies that are in the bottom left corner. And here, so we can clearly see the trade-off where we have either efficient but unsafe policies, or we can also have safe but inefficient policies. So the reward function allows us to navigate those graphs and get different behaviors. Another thing to notice is that the function that we use to fuse the utilities matters a lot. So here with SARSOP, we can see when we use the sum, we would get terrible performance. We couldn't find a good policy. Another reason is that the problem was starting to be very large, and we're reaching the tractability limit of what SARSOP can handle, even with the decomposition method. So after this procedure, we're going to choose a policy. So here, a reasonable choice could be, for example, this policy, because it showed no collision in simulation, and it's the most efficient. And here we'll choose also like this policy. For these two policies, we're going to compare them with a baseline. So here the baseline is a rule-based system where we hard-coded the behavior of slowly nudging forward to gain visibility. What we can see is that with either QMDP or SARSOP, we can find policies that are more performant than the baseline. Especially in both cases, QMDP was able to find safe policies. Here, SARSOP was again performing pretty poorly for tractability reasons. And the main difficulty, the main reason why the baseline couldn't perform as well is that it's really tricky with a rule-based system to handle occlusions and sensor limitations. So to conclude on this section, so we saw that MDP approaches can handle sensor occlusion and stochastic behaviors, and that they tend to outperform rule-based methods. By tuning the reward function, we can generate different behavior, more or less risk-averse or aggressive. And finally, using the decomposition method, we can scale decision-making algorithm to solve much larger problem with a very low computational cost. Now there are a couple limitations with this algorithm. So first, when we're decomposing the problem, we're actually making the assumption that every traffic participant is independent between each other. And when we fuse the information by either taking the sum or the mean, we're actually making a rough approximation of the overall utility of the situation. So to cope with this, we came up with this deep correction algorithm, which consists in learning a corrective term that will refine the approximation of the utility function. And we will show that this algorithm can lead to faster learning of policy and better performance. The main idea with the correction method is that we'll assume the value function can be written as a low fidelity approximation, this Q low, and a corrective term delta. Here, we saw in the previous section that we can compute this low fidelity approximation very efficiently using the decomposition method. So we could replace Q low by summing the individual utilities or taking the minimum, for example. And then from this approximation, we are going to try to refine it by learning this corrective term delta. To learn delta, we are going to use reinforcement learning. So the high-level idea behind reinforcement learning, we're still looking to approximate this value function Q. And so our agent, the policy, will interact with the environment, gather some information, and from that, try to estimate the value function Q. And so in that work, we have approximated the value function using a neural network. One thing to notice is that it's not a standard reinforcement learning setting in the sense that we have actually access to the model through a black box simulator that we can query as many times as we want. So here is the procedure to train the corrective factor. The first step is to learn the utility function of navigating this environment with only one traffic participant. Then we'll learn the correction factor in the environment with multiple traffic participants. And we'll get the low fidelity approximation using the decomposition method from the previous section. So in practice, how does that work? Once we train the individual Q function, we would use reinforcement learning again, but we will only update the correction term. Essentially, this block is frozen during training, and we will only take the gradient through the correction term here. So here are the quantitative results. So we are again looking at this trade-off between safety and efficiency, and we are comparing three methods. So DQN consists in trying to solve the full problem using deep reinforcement learning without any decomposition. The black curve is decomposition method only. This is an algorithm from the previous section. And the red curve is when we learn in addition this corrective factor. So what we can see is that all the policies generated using the correction method are closer to the region of optimality, which is this bottom left corner. So what we say is we have a domination of the correction method. So we can always find a policy generated by the correction method that's either safer or more efficient. To further analyze the advantage of this method, we'll look at how the performance would vary with the training budget, so the number of interactions that our agent is allowed with the environment. So what we can see is that with low training budget, the correction method in red tends to perform much faster than other approaches, and like using standard reinforcement learning. As we increase the training budget, all the algorithms tend to find very good policies. We compare against this value decomposition network baseline. It's an idea that came up about at the same time. And instead of having this two-step learning procedure, they also assume that we can decompose the problem, but they are going to jointly learn the weights of the individual utilities. So that's the main difference. And we got pretty similar trends, but it was a bit harder to tune and get to converge consistently. But to conclude this part, we saw that we could improve the approximation that we got from the decomposition method by learning this corrective term, that we could learn it through deep reinforcement learning, and that overall this approach can lead to faster learning, and that the policy that we get outperforms policies that we would get by using standard deep reinforcement learning and trying to solve the whole problem from scratch. So far I addressed the first issue about decision-making algorithm, which is scalability. So we saw how to use the decomposition method and the correction algorithm, how to handle situations with many traffic participants. But of course, one of the most important aspects of autonomous driving is safety. And so far, the way we handle safety was by tuning this cost in the reward function. But it's kind of a tedious procedure and does not really guarantee anything about the performance. So here I'm going to show you how we can rely on a model checker to improve the safety of the algorithm. So model checking allows to verify property of a system with very high confidence. So we would be given a safety specification, a discrete MDP model of the environment, and the model checker would be able to identify actions that are safe or not according to the specification and the model. Then we can use this property to constrain a reinforcement learning agent to only use the safe action. How do we compute the safe action? So we define this quantity over there as the probability of reaching the goal safely. It's the probability of success. The good news is that this quantity can be computed using value iteration, which is polynomial in the number of states. So it can be computed pretty efficiently. Then once we have this quantity, we'll also be given gamma, which is an acceptable probability of success. So this is our safety specification. And to identify safe action, we'll say that an action is safe if the probability of success is greater than gamma. So in practice, that would mean we want a probability of success of not crashing that's greater than 0.999999. This is the kind of specification that we assume. For this part, we'll have to assume full observability, and I'll show you at the end how we can reintroduce the partial observability assumption. But for now, using model checking, we can identify the safe action. And we can design a constrained exploration strategy for a reinforcement learning agent. So there are two cases. So the first one is we have no safe action. All the actions do not satisfy our safety specification. So in that case, we'll default to the safest possible action, the one with the maximum probability of success. In the second case, we have a couple of options, a couple of different actions that are safe. In that case, we can use any standard exploration policy to choose among the safe actions, like epsilon greedy, for example. So what does this guarantee? It guarantees that we'll never prioritize unsafe action over safe action. However, we cannot directly guarantee that our reinforcement learning agent will have a certain probability of success. Even if we don't have a strong guarantee, this is still a useful algorithm. Here, again, the same safety efficiency trade-off. And we're comparing standard reinforcement learning and the reinforcement learning algorithm with the constrained exploration. So to get those points, we tune the reward function. So if we have high collision cost, we get a policy that's way over there. It's still not extremely safe and very inefficient. If we have a low collision cost, we get unsafe policies that are very aggressive. However, when we use the constrained exploration policy, we're able to move our operation space to only look at policies that are safe. Because essentially the model checker didn't allow the agent to explore those other options. So it simplifies the design process in that we can decouple the two objectives. The model checker will address the safety aspect, and then we can use reinforcement learning to optimize for efficiency and comfort, for example. So now, how can we use that with the previous decomposition method to get the full-end decision-making algorithm? So again, we'll use this the decomposition approach. We'll have a complex situation that will decompose into sub-problems. For each of the sub-problems, we'll evaluate the probability of success given by the model checker and the value function given by the reinforcement learning algorithm. And we can fuse this information using, for example, the minimum strategy, which we have seen is a bit more riskier. In this part, we'll slightly revisit the decomposition method. Instead of considering agents one at a time, we'll consider a subset of agents with one car and one pedestrian. So in this scenario, if we decompose that scene into all the sub-problems, we'll have to consider all the combination of car pedestrians. So here I show like in green, for example, this is one instance of the subproblem. In purple, another one, and in blue, another one. So here is a summary of all the steps. First, we find a suitable way to decompose the scenario. Then we compute the probability of success using model checking, compute the value function using reinforcement learning with constraint exploration, and then we use utility fusion to merge together the information from all the subproblems. So here is a demonstration of the algorithm. So again, in blue is the belief where you think agents actually are in the environment. And green are the observations that you get from your sensor. So it's sensitive to occlusion. You also have false positive and false negative. So we can see that our algorithm is able to handle complex scenario. We have this kind of like intelligent behavior where instead of waiting here forever, it's being proactive and waiting here where it has much more chance to cross faster. It's able to handle occlusions through buildings. And it reaches the goal. So as you have seen, there are many different components in the algorithm. So to evaluate the advantage of each of them, we designed a suite of different evaluation scenarios. So the scenarios A and B are just testing for robustness to sensor noise and sensor occlusion. So there's only one car in the environment. Scenario C and D assume full observability, but they're checking if our algorithm can leverage interaction between traffic participants. So here, can we infer that this car is going to stop for the pedestrian, and then that would actually be safe for us to go in that case. And finally, scenario E is everything together. It's the scenario that I just showed in the video. So here are the results for all of the scenarios. So here we show the number of steps it takes to reach the goal, to do the left turn. And here's the number of collisions. So this is evaluated through 10,000 simulations. And we compare different settings. So whether we use reinforcement learning or a rule-based method, whether we use model checking or not, so the safe policy are using model checking, and whether we use belief update with updater or not. So if we don't use it, it means we're trying to process directly the noisy observation. There are 5 conclusions to draw here. The first one is, if we look at scenario A, B, C, D, most of the methods have the same performance. So it means that even rule-based methods are fine for these scenarios. They would work pretty well. When we rely on model checking, we improve safety significantly. So if we look at the gray and purple policy, they didn't show any collision in simulation. Then we can also see that the one using belief state updates are more robust and safer. And finally, the two last facts is that the scene decomposition method is very good to scale to large scenarios. And that when we use reinforcement learning in complex scenario like scenario E, we have much better performance than rule-based method. So it's the blue and the gray policy. And the two methods using rule-based had like very high time to the goal, and in fact, most of the time they were actually timing out because they were never able to find a good moment to cross. Okay, we're almost there. This is the last section. So in the previous section, we saw how to use model checking to improve safety of a reinforcement learning agent. But we had to relax the assumption that we had limited observation. And here I'll show you how we can use model checking in partially observable environment. And especially, we will see that we can use UniPMTP solvers to solve model checking problem. And I'll show you how we can easily build a state-of-the-art model checker. Right. So before we're going to look at the subset of model checking problem, which is constraint reachability, it consists in answering the following question. What's the probability of reaching a given set of state, the green set, while avoiding another set of state, the red state. Now we can notice one thing. If we define the following reward function that gives +1 to the agent in the green set and 0 everywhere else, and if we say that the red set is absorbing, meaning that if we get there, then we'll stay there forever. So with this structure, if we are trying to maximize the accumulated reward, then the value function associated to that problem is exactly equal to the probability of success. Now, let's look at what happens for POMDP. We can slightly alter the definition. So instead of looking at the probability of success in any state, we'll look at the probability of success from any belief. And we have a similar result, that the probability of success is equal to the value function in a POMDP where we set the reward and the absorbing state, just like I showed you on the previous slide. What that means is we can build a complete POMDP model checker as follows. We could take as input a logic formula, so it's broader than just reachability problem. We take also as input a discrete POMDP model, and we want to compute the probability of satisfying the formula. So the first step would be to convert this problem to a reachability problem, and once we've done that, we can define a reward function and use our standard POMDP planning algorithm like the one I showed on the very first section, for example. In practice, we implemented a tool by connecting two existing libraries. So Spot is at the core of this transformation to reachability problem. And POMDP.jl is a POMDP planning library. And this is the architecture of the overall tool. And the cool thing is that we can replace this box by any value-based method that's in the POMDP library. So we can choose whichever algorithm we want. And this allowed us to get the following result. So we are comparing the precision we get on the probability of success and the solving time. And we were able to toggle very easily between different POMDP algorithms, SARSOP, QMDP, FID. And previous work were all limited to what's called this Lovejoy approximation, which is essentially naively discretizing the belief space. So by being able to use powerful methods like SARSOP, we're able to get much better solving time and much better precision. And the most important result is that we were actually able to solve model checking problem in POMDPs that were intractable before. What that means is that it can be directly applied to our occluded crosswalk scenario, for example, and we could compute a probability of success for every belief point. So here I show the probability of success in function of the belief state. So the x-axis is the position of the car on the road. The y-axis is the position of the pedestrian on the crosswalk. So essentially, this red region here corresponds to the emergency braking area, where the car is just here and the pedestrian is just in front of the car. What the model checking tool allows us to do, since we're able to solve a partially observable problem, we can actually vary the uncertainty that we have on the pedestrian location and analyze how our probability of success varies as well. And that can be a very useful tool to decide whether or not to deploy an algorithm for you. To conclude on this section, so I showed you that model checking problems can be solved as reachability problem in POMDPs, and that for that we could use planners like SARSOP for model checking instead of traditional reward maximization setting. That the methodology provides state-of-the-art performance, and for now it's only limited to discrete models only. Okay. So I have presented my work on scaling decision-making algorithms and how to make them safe using model checking. And now it's time to conclude. There are four main takeaways. So the first one is that POMDP methods are very well suited to autonomous driving problems, as they provide robustness to sensor occlusion and perception uncertainty. And they also outperform rule-based methods. The second point is that decomposition methods improve the scalability of POMDP solvers, and we can use deep reinforcement learning to further refine the approximation. Then we saw that we could use model checking to improve the safety of reinforcement learning policies. And finally, we saw that POMDP planners can solve model checking problems. The algorithms I presented today were all evaluated in simulation, but of course, the ultimate goal is to deploy them in the real world. So there are already the work by Carl Ray and others who have demonstrated POMDPs in the real world. I'm also very excited about multi-agent reinforcement learning and the potential to learn cooperative policies and interactive behaviors. And finally, what I think is a very promising area of research is to combine model-based planning with data-driven model. We could learn a sophisticated model from data and use it within our POMDP planning algorithm, for example. Due to time constraint, I couldn't talk about everything that's in my thesis. I also worked on online planning for navigating intersection using tree search methods. And I worked on learning to merge into dense traffic using reinforcement learning, where you're trying to learn a policy in a low fidelity simulator in pretty chaotic scenarios, and then try to transfer it in some higher fidelity simulator. Here are the publications associated with the work I presented today. And finally, I would like to thank my sponsors, the Hoda Research Institute. They funded my research throughout my Ph.D. And so this work would not have been possible without them. And overall, they were great sponsors. They provided very useful feedback on my research on a weekly basis. It was a great collaboration. I would also like to thank the Wallenberg AI Autonomous Systems and Software Programs for sponsoring my exchange to Sweden. I'm very glad I was able to do that. So I hope that now you realize that decision making is a very important problem for autonomous driving, and that thanks to the methods I presented today, like the decomposition method and the safe planning approach, we have made one step towards deploying safe autonomous vehicles on the road. Thank you very much for your attention.